Ever notice how sometimes it's like the quietest person in the room? They're not the loudest, not the most, what's the word, flamboyant. But somehow they always seem to get their way.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like they're playing a whole different game, right?
Absolutely. It's almost like they're pulling strings from the shadows, you know? And today we're gonna dive deep into that very idea.
That's right. We're tackling strategy, hashtag 32, from Robert Greene's The 33 Strategies of War, and it's called Dominate While Seeming to Submit. Now, right off the bat, I got to say, that phrase passive aggression, it gets thrown around a lot these days.
Oh, yeah.
And it often means, like, leaving snarky notes or being indirectly
Yeah,
hostile.
right, right. Not exactly strategic genius.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what we're talking about here, it's a whole other level. It's a deliberate strategy of appearing weak, compliant, maybe even a little bit helpless, all to gain the upper hand.
It's about deception, really, making your opponent think they have the advantage while you're subtly positioning yourself for the win.
And this isn't just some ancient battlefield tactic. This stuff plays out everywhere, in business deals, in office politics, even in personal relationships. So understanding it can really give you an edge, make you more aware of the power dynamics all around you.
Absolutely. Because once you see it, you realize it's everywhere.
Okay, so let's unpack this. First up, why the heck would appearing weak actually help you become dominant? What's the logic there?
Well, one of the big things is underestimation. When you don't come across as a threat, people just naturally let their guard down.
Yeah.
They don't see you coming. And Greene actually says it pretty bluntly in the book. When you act like you're submitting, your enemies let down their guard, underestimate you, and even hand over power without realizing it.
So it's almost like a magic trick. You're distracting them with this facade of weakness while you're setting up the real play.
Precisely. And the less they see you as a threat, the more likely they are to, reveal their own weaknesses, their plans, maybe even their vulnerabilities.
Which you can then use to your advantage. It's kind of sneaky, but also pretty brilliant when you think about it.
Oh, it's incredibly effective. And there's another layer to this too. Trust. When you're not constantly challenging or confronting people, they tend to see you as more trustworthy.
They're more likely to open up to you, share information, that sort of thing.
Exactly. They see you as an ally, someone safe, not a rival they need to be wary of. And that can give you a huge advantage in any kind of strategic situation.
So you're playing the long game here. You're building trust, you're gathering information, and all the while, you're positioning yourself for control.
And here's the key. By the time your true strength becomes apparent, it's often too late for them to do anything about it.
Yeah.
You've already outmaneuvered them.
Wow. Okay, let's see how this plays out in the real world. The book talks about Empress Dowager Cixi of China, a pretty remarkable figure. Can you give us a little background on her?
So, Cixi started out as a concubine in the imperial court back in the 19th century. And in that kind of hierarchical system, she was, pretty low on the totem pole. Outwardly, she showed deference to the emperor, to the officials, all the people in power.
Not exactly the picture of someone who would eventually rule an entire empire.
Right. But behind the scenes, she was anything but passive. She was incredibly shrewd. She started cultivating relationships, building alliances with powerful people in the court. At the same time, she was subtly working to undermine anyone she saw as a threat.
So she was playing this double game, appearing submissive on the surface while secretly building her own power base.
Exactly. And it's a perfect example of how this strategy isn't just about being quiet or meek. It's about understanding the power dynamics of a situation and using them to your advantage. Cixi was a master at that. She managed to seize control of the entire Chinese empire without ever really staging an open rebellion. She was just that good at manipulating the system from within. And the lesson there is, well, appear submissive until you are strong enough to rule. It's not about brute force, it's about strategic positioning.
Yeah, she really flipped the script on everyone. Okay, so let's fast forward to the modern day. The book mentions Jeff Bezos and the rise of Amazon. How does that fit into this whole dominate while seeming to submit thing?
Well, think about Amazon in the beginning. It was just this little online bookstore, right? I mean, compared to the giant retail chains out there, it seemed pretty harmless.
I remember those days. You could order a book online. Whoop-dee-doo. Didn't seem like a big deal at the time.
Exactly. And that's exactly what Bezos was counting on. While the big retailers were focused on their physical stores and their existing customers, Amazon was quietly expanding. First it was books, then music, then electronics. Pretty soon they were selling well, everything.
And all the while, the big guys were like, Psh, it's just Amazon. What are they going to do?
Yeah, they completely underestimated them. They were so focused on the present that they missed the bigger picture, the long-term vision that Bezos had. And the lesson there is, appear non-threatening while quietly taking control of the market. And by the time those big retailers woke up, it was too late. Amazon had already become this massive force reshaping the entire retail landscape.
So it's about staying under the radar, right? Not making a big splash until you're ready to make a really big splash. Okay, so this is all fascinating stuff, but how can the average person, our listener, actually use this strategy in their own life?
Well, the key is to be deliberate about how you present yourself. You want to come across as agreeable, cooperative, even a little bit deferential, especially when you're dealing with people in positions of power.
So it's not about being a pushover. It's about choosing your battles carefully.
Exactly. You don't want to be the person who's constantly challenging authority or picking fights. That's just going to put a target on your back. Instead, focus on building relationships, gaining trust, and subtly positioning yourself for advancement.
So blend in, but be strategic about it.
Right. And remember, avoid direct confrontation, especially when you're not in a position of strength. The book actually advises blend in, observe, and wait for your moment. And that's really important because challenging someone directly, especially if they have more power than you, it can backfire big time.
It's like picking a fight with a grizzly bear. Not a good idea unless
Yeah.
you're, incredibly well prepared.
Exactly. It's much smarter to be patient, to wait for the right opportunity to make your move. And the book actually brings up another great example of this, Joseph Stalin.
Stalin. Talk about playing the long game.
Oh, he was a master of it. After Lenin died, there was this huge power vacuum in the Soviet Union, and you had all these prominent figures vying for control, openly fighting with each other. But Stalin, he took a different approach. He played it cool, presented himself as this loyal, unassuming party member.
So while everyone else was busy scrapping, he was quietly working behind the scenes.
Exactly. He was placing his allies in key positions, consolidating his power base, and all the while his rivals were so busy fighting amongst themselves that they didn't even see him coming. It's a perfect example of how letting others destroy themselves while you rise unnoticed can be an incredibly effective strategy.
Wow. It's chilling, but also incredibly effective. Okay, but the book also gives a warning about this strategy, right?
Yeah.
Like, you can't just stay submissive forever.
Absolutely. There's a fine line here. If you appear weak for too long, people might actually start to believe it. And then you'll lose all credibility, all influence.
You become the doormat, not the mastermind.
Exactly. So it's all about timing. You got to know when to make your move, when to shift from seeming submissive to asserting your dominance. And that's not always easy to judge.
It's a delicate balance, for
Yeah.
sure. The book mentions IBM and Microsoft as a cautionary tale here. What happened there?
This is a classic example of how underestimating a seemingly weaker player can come back to bite you. So back in the early days of personal computers, IBM was the king, right? They were the big dogs. And they hired this little company, Microsoft, to develop the operating system for their PCs.
So IBM's thinking, we're the brains, they're just the brawn.
Exactly. But Microsoft, they were playing a much deeper game. While IBM focused on hardware, Microsoft quietly expanded its influence in the software market. They started licensing their operating system to other computer makers, and pretty soon, it was everywhere.
And IBM, they were so focused on their own hardware that they didn't even realize what was happening.
Exactly. They missed the bigger picture, the fact that software was becoming just as important as hardware, if not more so. And the lesson there is, even if you think you're in control, you got to be aware of the quiet threats, the ones that might seem insignificant at first, but have the potential to completely upend the game.
And of course, Microsoft ended up becoming this tech behemoth, while IBM, well, they lost a lot of their dominance. It's a pretty sobering story. And the book
Yeah.
brings up another modern example, Google and AI.
Yeah, this is a fascinating one. For years, Google was pouring tons of resources into developing artificial intelligence, but they weren't really making a big fuss about it, at least not publicly. It was like this quiet side project they were working on.
While everyone else was focused on, I don't know, social media or whatever the hot new thing was at the time.
Exactly. And I think that was a deliberate strategy on Google's part. They were downplaying their strengths, letting the competition underestimate them, and then boom, all of a sudden, AI explodes, it's everywhere, and Google's already miles ahead of everyone else.
And now they're basically the leader in the field. It's amazing how they managed to pull that off. Okay, So we've covered a lot of ground here. What are the big takeaways for our listener? What do we really want them to remember from this deep dive into strategy #32?
I think the biggest takeaway is that real power often comes from operating under the radar. Like the book says, the greatest warriors, businesses, and leaders don't challenge power directly. They make others believe they are harmless while secretly pulling all the strings. It's a subtle but incredibly powerful approach to gaining influence.
So it's not about being the loudest or the most aggressive. It's about being strategic, patient, and knowing when to make your move.
Exactly. And to do that, you got to be observant, understand the power dynamics at play, and cultivate that image of harmlessness. You got to blend in, build trust, and then when the time is right, strike with precision.
It's a bit Machiavellian,
Eh.
but also undeniably effective. So as you go about your day, think about this strategy. Where do you see it playing out around you, and how can you use it to achieve your own goals?
And remember, this is just one perspective on power. There are so many different ways to gain influence, to achieve your objectives. Keep exploring, keep learning, and you'll find what works best for you.
That's right. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the 33 strategies of war. Until next time, keep your wits sharp and your strategies even sharper.